right, it's good day to everyone. I know it's lunchtime, but please, this is very important to me, my minister, and to the government that you all are here and you pay very close attention to what I will say so you can help me, help the government, help my minister to put together a very good plan that is for our people, and for the betterment of our people. So bear with me as I go through my presentation. I will basically talk about the development performance of our country for the last 43 years, but focusing on the last 10 years, and why we must pursue growth to secure a better Papua New Guinea. But I think I like what Prime Minister said better than what my statement is here. We need a stronger economy to secure our future. And that is why we are here today and for the next 2 days. I'd like to also acknowledge the Prime Minister for being here, and I think he's made a right choice to come and sit with us this morning and give his views about how he also sees how we can progress the development of our country. Acknowledge the presence of my minister, and he has spearheaded this. He's very passionate about how he wants us to develop this country going forward into the future. The host governor and your distinguished members that are here also with you, your delegation. Chief Secretary, thank you. You know, this is the first time that Chief Secretary attended one of my summits, and I really appreciate that because I think he's the one that sets in place what the intention of government is and the role of government. So thank you so much, Chief, for your presence here. Our private sector partners, an important partner that contributes to our development partners that are in the room with us. We have international guest speakers in terms of global perspective into the way our development should be and how they can be able to contribute to us moving our development agendas. Our members of parliament, our cabinet ministers, thank you so much for coming this afternoon. And I would like to encourage, and I will echo what Prime Minister said, practical criticism, practical input so that it can be able to guide us properly going forward. Now, our country has taken a very long journey in terms of development as an independent nation, and we started 43 years ago, and I think that message has been repeatedly mentioned this morning. We have gone through a number of governments, we have gone through a number of policies, a number of plans, a number of strategies. We have gone through a number of budgets for the last 43 years. We have also gone through challenges, and we have also gone through many prosperous times. That's evident. But we have progressed despite all of those as a young nation going forward and a young nation going into adulthood. And we do not intend to leave anyone behind. That is the purpose of why we need to have a very constructive, practical plan that will take us from these 5 years onwards. So I'll start with saying what I would present. I would look at the current development status of Papua New Guinea. Now, I got to be frank, and I am going to be shooting us straight in the face of how our status is now. And also mentioning the 5 growth strategies that we intend to take to grow our economy, and basically looking at sector targets and strategies. And these are the targets and strategies that we had put together in terms of national targets in consultation with many of you in this room. When you look at these targets that I will present, I want you to critically tell me whether the targets represent what each of your sectors really want practically and whether we can be able to achieve it together. And I'll talk about basically what the current medium-term development plan is. So we'll start off with the economic development, the status of our economic development now. I have the governor for the bank that's here in the room. I will state some figures, and I'm sure in his presentation he will affirm these figures or he will support the figures and complement that going on. This is what our gross domestic product, this is the performance of our gross domestic product and other performance. So in the last 5 years, the country's economic performance has been hit hard by the weak global economic performance, combined with the slowing down of the production, especially in the Asian economy, along with recessionary pressures from Australia and other European economies. So these external shocks negatively affect our global commodity prices, resulting also in lower revenue exports in Papua New Guinea as well. So international shocks does affect us. Papua New Guinea's economy performance followed the fluctuation of global commodity price, as extractive and primary sector constitute most of our national export. So the average GDP growth rate of 10% over the last 10 years peaked during the heavy construction phase and the first sale of our LNG. However, this declined during the suppressed domestic activities. So our Treasury Department's medium-term economic focus says that the economic growth is still set to remain subdued over the prevailing condition. So the overall growth trend is more predictable when global commodity prices are high, translating into higher export earning and government tax revenue, while the opposite will happen when global price declines. Such scenario makes Papua New Guinea easily susceptible to global economic shocks, which calls for drastic shift in policy to redesign the economy of Papua New Guinea. In terms of our monetary and fiscal performance, you can see in the red box, we have a negative service balance and higher import demand, putting pressure on our forex. We have fiscal deficits which started to grow since 2013 as the expenditure increased while revenue declined. So our Bank of Papua New Guinea's primary monetary policy goal is to maintain price stability. And it also, while it takes a natural stance and only intervene in exchange rates and foreign reserve when necessary. This was a message also mentioned by our Prime Minister. The external account improved in 2016 and 2017 as the result of moderate commodity prices and production increases in some agriculture commodity and mining, including our LNG. However, did this not translate into increased tax collection, which is very true, causing revenue shortfalls and foreign reserve issues. In turn, it put pressure on our government's demand of domestic financing. So that was what has been happening. The government has been running many deficit budget since 2012. That is a fact as well. Due to revenue collection shortfall, which attributed to several shocks, such as the drought and the fall in commodity prices externally. And also the government opted to take massive capital investment projects or programs, especially in our medium-term development plan number 1, intending to create enabling environment so that we can grow the economy at that time. Our revenue performance. So Papua New Guinea's revenue collection started to decline in 2015. These shortfalls are from personal income tax, which declined by 3.2% or 168 million, which culminated over the years from 2015 to 2017. Company tax also fell by 8.1% or 858 million over the period, contributed largely by our mineral and petroleum sector and the completion of the construction activities within the construction or the LNG phase. And then taxes on our goods and services, which declined by 4% or 168, The drop was cushioned, although this was a drop, it was cushioned by our stable performance in the VAT component as it is broad-based. So the lower level of revenue collection is explained by the foreign exchange shortfall, which has a recessionary effect on the economy, winding down of most construction and infrastructure activity in the mining and petroleum sector, and also the government's cutback on expenditure on investment. So at the backdrop of the 2015 drought and the decline in the revenue, the government has reduced the public investment program in 2016 and 2017, which was evident. While it is supposed to stimulate demand in the economy and to move business activities in the absence of a proactive private sector. The fall in the global commodity prices also had a negative impact or effect and accounted for 30% of the total revenue shortfall, while the larger component is attributed to the non-resource sectors such as retail, wholesale, service and construction, and others. So it calls for structural and administrative arrangements that needs to be in place. Whilst we talk about the structural and administrative shortcoming, this is also contribute to shortfalls to institutions' ability to collect taxes, ability to be able to go out and do what they're supposed to do in terms of compliance and monitoring and inspection so that it contributes to more revenue raising measures. Now this is what the kind of industries that we have currently in Papua New Guinea. Papua New Guinea's main industries has not been performing to their expected potential. They have not been performing. So you can see that clearly on the graph that is there in front of you. Papua New Guinea's core industries have not been performing, but maybe I should say on a moderate growth path since 2010. The resource sector, which had a large potential, has not been performing as well as expected due to the lack of investment drive from both the private sector as well as government interventions, prevailing binding constraints in land issues, also law and order issues, and critical investments, especially in our enablers. The mining and petroleum, including our LNG, has had a mushrooming effect on the economy only felt during the construction and the peak production or sales period, but the socio-economic effects have not been felt, or it has been limited to pockets of very specific corridors only. Agriculture, fisheries, and forestry potentials are there. Those are our strategic assets and has a lot of potential, but can only be realized if increased activities in downstream processing and value-added manufacturing activities were engaged from the start with conducive fiscal and administrative investments from government. So the overall growth contribution from Papua New Guinea's main industry includes GDP growth over 8%, revenue growth of less than 5%, and employment growth of 2% over the last 5 years. So the absolute GDP Kina value according to Treasury estimated for 2017 is around 75.0 billion. So a boom in the resource sector allows the non-resource sector to feed off well with higher growth performance. The last 2 years, the non-resource sector experienced a mild depression as activities and demand slowed, driven by lower commodity prices and foreign reserve challenges. So the main industries of Papua New Guinea, I should say, have not really contributed to growth and development up to expected standards, and needs more to be done to stimulate growth, and especially utilizing their potential in their areas, various areas. The foreign exchange reserve problem, and that has been a problem that there has been an issue that we've been discussing over and over again, and the issue that Prime Minister responded to this morning. So since 2015, PNG has been faced with this issue of foreign exchange. In 2017, our BPNG reported that The government's foreign exchange reserve was sufficient to cover the first only 6 months of imports. The reserve shortage problem directly hit businesses, as we all know, as backlog of orders for foreign exchange built up. So overseas suppliers did not afford to offer sustainable credit to Papua New Guinea firms. Even the clearance of foreign exchange currency before importing slowed down businesses and also reduced employment. When it hit us the first time, we had unemployment, we had companies laying off their workers. This has a negative impact on the economy, as we all know, because most activities in the non-resource sectors heavily depend on imports. They heavily depend on imports. So between 2012 and 2016, the exchange rate depreciated by over 15%, exacerbated by lower commodity prices, lower export flows, and increasing import demands. So this goes to show that PNG's economy, in terms of growth drivers, is not structured well to accommodate the global negative shocks. And like Prime Minister said, it can be seen as negative, but it's also a good thing. So it forces us to look into the other sectors and try to grow the other sectors as well. Lopsided export drivers. The ongoing foreign exchange issue goes further to show that PNG's economic structure in terms of its export drivers are more skewed towards the mining and petroleum sector, and that is unsustainable. These are further aggravated by mining and petroleum companies paying less or no tax through foreign currencies, as they declare less profits as a result of low commodity prices and high operating costs. The message my minister said, why are some companies declaring profit and some are not? Despite having recorded higher export values averaging over 20 billion annually over the last 3 years, tax revenue contributed from mining and petroleum sector only amounts to over 100 million in 2017. The problem PNG has right now is that of its total export value of 25 billion in 2016, 20 billion is accounted for by the mining and petroleum sector, while the others, including fisheries, agriculture, forestry, only accounts for 20% of this. That's a big difference between these two. So the PNG economy is broad-based in terms of GDP measure, and as the mining and petroleum sector only accounts for 24%, the cause of concern is that PNG is heavily reliant on the non-renewable sector for the larger contribution to our export revenue. So I'm looking at the problems here. So what could be some of the solutions? We focus more on increasing exports from renewable sectors, focusing on strategic assets that we have, that Papua New Guinea has the potential to be able to generate revenue from. If nothing is done, Papua New Guinea economy will still be subjected to global shocks and will continue to face foreign exchange issues and revenue shortage in the long run. Now, GDP growth and employment performance. The average growth rate, economic growth rate, was 12% from 2005 to 2016. Papua New Guinea's dependency on traditional primary product and extractive industry, together with its heavy dependency on import, made the economy more vulnerable to shock. So several global and domestic shocks significantly affected the otherwise robust performance of the economy. So the slowdown in economic activities and demand in 2009 resulted in a dramatic decline in our commodity prices, which affected decreased exports and GDP growth. While a rebound in commodity prices and picking of construction of the phase of our first LNG in 2011 contributed to 27% of our GDP growth. Now in 2015, GDP peaked over 35% due to the first sale of our LNG, also at the backdrop of the drought that we had during that time. The drought-induced recession in the non-mining and petroleum sector and the fall in commodity prices, which also seen a huge decline in agriculture revenue and non-mining employment growth rate. Now, the positive trend in global economic market was observed in 2016 and 2017. However, the prices are generally forecasted to remain subdued over the medium term. All of this led to a steady decline in formal employment in the last few years, especially in our non-resource sector. So in 2017, formal employment increased mainly in the extractive sector, but it remained low and decreased in all other industries. Given the current economic situation, employment is expected to remain suppressed as recessionary pressures remain if domestic demand is not stimulated through a combination of fiscal, monetary, and structural policy initiatives. Now, in terms of social development status and where we are right now, we have a population that is growing. We cannot deny that. Our population growth rate is 3.1%. It's the highest population growth rate amongst the less developed country, averaging around 2.7%. It's the largest. The alarming growth rate resulting from the high fertility rates, especially amongst our young people, in the population strata, with the lack of access and awareness to proper family planning, information and facility, is a cause of concern amongst policymakers and political leaders. So if population growth rate is unchecked at 3.1% annually, the GDP per capita will decline as population overshoots the expected carrying capacity of the economy, and it will add a lot of pressure, still a lot of pressure on our economy. If normal annualization growth method is used, the population growth will reach 10 million from the current level of 8.4 million by 2022. That's if we look at it annually. If it's a compounded growth and the compounded growth is used, the population dynamics will account and the population will double by 2022, which is very serious, and that is a great concern. We may not have enough revenue. We may not have enough to generate enough revenue to look after everyone. If GDP growth rate remains subdued as shown in the previous chart, if MTDP agendas is to be doubled, and if we don't double that, and if we don't double our GDP per capita by 2022, PNG economy will face much more greater challenge, much more greater challenge to look after the population that we have. So population growth is a serious concern in our development planning, and as it puts a lot more pressure on our sustainable use of our limited resources and the available public goods and services. It will put a lot of strain on our education facilities, a lot of strain on our health services, and a lot of strain on most of the services that government provides. We need to manage our population growth. The workforce of the country constitutes mostly age group between 25 and 55. This age group pays tax and they generate revenue for the income for the country. Addressing their needs is very important, especially in terms of health education, minimum wage, law and justice, entrepreneurship, and access to information. A healthy, educated population is very important for us as well. So in terms of human development, which is also a bigger agenda for us in this medium-term development plan, our HDI is even worse amongst our Pacific neighbors. And that prompted a downgrade to a status of less developed country. That's in terms of HDI. So you can see that our population in 2016, 7.5 million. Growth rate is 3.1%. Human development indices, 0.466, lower development category, and we're placed 56 out of 187 countries. Our life expectancy, 63 years. I think it's for mainly our male That's the life expectancy, and the rest that goes down. So we have been downgraded from a middle-income country to a less developed country in terms of our HDI. It is an international standard that measures the living standard of people, measuring the composite statistics of life expectancy, education, per capita income of Papua New Guinea. So those are the measures that they use to measure HDI. HDI measure is to give a country's placing in the world in terms of standard of living of its people. So how do we measure poverty? I think that was one of the messages that our pastor presented to us this morning. So we have 37.5% of population living below poverty line, of having to live on US 1.25 or 300 or 3 kina 70 toya a day. So that is what it says. But this measure, I know all of you will say that it's not applicable for, yes, it's not applicable to Papua New Guinea, especially a majority of the population. So what we used in terms of measuring poverty is that we measure that through access to service. So our rural population, if they are able to access service, then that's how we measure poverty in Papua New Guinea. So the Household Income Survey 2010 recorded that 37.5% of the population live below poverty line, or having to live at with about 3 kina 70 toya per day. So the measure, like I said, it's not applicable. So Papua New Guinea adopted the definition of poverty as poverty of opportunities, using access to service as the main indicator to measure its depth. So the majority of our people, our rural population, face hardships daily, not because of extreme hunger. Note that, not because of extreme hunger, but because of the lack of access to certain services. Basic services such as electricity, water supply, hygiene facility, transport connectivity, proximity to health centers and schools, access to markets, and others. So those are the things that people say that we need to have access to. It's not extreme hunger as defined globally. It is significantly low, it significantly lowers the quality of life of people. Now, law and order is also one of our biggest constraints or barriers in terms of development as well. So it affects businesses, direct foreign investments, goods and service delivery, and social cohesion in our society. A total of 5,500 SWAN officers, which is a ratio of 1 police officer to 1,200 people, compared to the international benchmark of 1 police officer to 450 people. That's the current status of law and order in this country. We have 1 police officer looking after 1,200 people. It's quite big for 1 police officer. So the cost of crime to the nation implies a massive burden and challenge on development. At least 9% of business revenues were negative because of the impact of crime. Other opportunity cost rises from employment denied, taxes and custom duties unpaid, and other foregone benefits as a direct result of crime. Private sector development are very important partners, and the partners that we want to engage to work with us so that we can be able to drive our growth in the country. Investments of business and business development status. Now, the development of a vibrant public sector or private sector is a necessary ingredient for socio-economic development, as private sector provides employment, produces goods and services, and also pays taxes to government. Private sector investment in Papua New Guinea is concentrated mainly in the wholesale, the retail business, which contribute about 9% to the GDP. The non-mining and petroleum sector, 16%, and the mining and petroleum sector, 18%. Manufacturing, about 9%, construction, 12%, and the others contributing less than 6%. So that's the kind of arrangement that they have in terms of contributing to our GDP. There is little dynamic development in private sector, as players do not take risks in broader potential areas, but prefer their traditional activities in the extractive, retail, basic service products only attracted to urban markets such as real estates and finance. So we see a lot of our private sector only in Port Moresby and only in Lae. What about the rest of Papua New Guinea? Majority of foreign direct investment inflows comes from the mining and petroleum sector of the country. Due to the shortfall or slowdown in the sector and the economy, the volume of foreign direct investment has significantly lower over the last 7 years, but it picked up in the first half of 2017. There is a direct correlation between GDP growth as the indicator of the overall economic performance and foreign direct investment. Now, looking at the annual GDP growth rates and the average capital account balance, it is evident that foreign direct inflows, investment inflows, follows the GDP growth trend. So apart from the GDP growth rate in 2014, which was related to the first sale of our LNG, and not combined with the additional economic activities and industrial developments. I'll go on to the external sectors as well. This is also one of our important sectors that we need to look at. Papua New Guinea's balance of payments has been positive, especially the volume of exports, which exceeds the volume of imports. It's largely due to exports of mineral resource commodities. The mineral export constitutes an average of 76% of the total export over a period from 2010 to 2016, with a higher value in 2014 after the start of the LNG production. Agriculture export decreased from 18% in 2011 and to 8% of total exports in 2016. The manufacturing industry contributes a very small portion of 1 to 2% of the total export. This is as per the graph that is there before you. Import composition. The share of import as proportion to the GDP decreased from 25% to 10% over the same period. The largest item of imported goods was machinery and transport equipment. That is our largest import. Its share in import declined from 38% in 2010 to 23% in 2016. So the share of miscellaneous manufactured articles increased from 15% to 36% in total. Now, in terms of our trade in services, the areas that we trade in, especially our service areas, we have a large or a huge imbalance in trade services. We import more than we export. So it also puts a pressure on our forex issue that's before us. So the balance of services account has historically been negative. The import chart shows the dynamics in service account over 4 years, 2013 to 2016. Import of services is much more larger than export, particularly in computer, information, education, transportation, government, and construction services. So export of services has been observed in transportation, insurance, also in computer and information services. Now this is explained by the low capacity of our local workforce and the lack of highly qualified human resources. So the MTDP3, within this MTDP3, the government will focus also on the development of the service sector to decrease our reliance on imported services and to develop our human or national human skills and resources. Now the SME performance. In terms of baseline indicators, we have about 49,500 registered SMEs right now. The number of SMEs owned by indigenous Papua New Guinea nationals, 80%. SME contribution to GDP, only 10%. SME sector employment, about 290,000. So per capita income from SME is only $2,000 US. Citizen control over the formal economy, only 10%. The SME sector is a sleeping giant, and the SME sector needs us to push it and to wake it up. Now, this is the status of where we are right now in terms of our assessment from the last 10 years or since 43 years of our independence. So where do we want to be? Where do we want to be going forward? Now, I will present to you indicators of where we want to go, but I need you to help me to say that these indicators are the indicators that we can carry together and we can be able to implement. So the 5 growth strategies under the medium-term development plan that we intend to look at, taking on board the theme of this workshop, or this seminar, we'd like to look at promote exports. We'd like to promote exports. We want to reduce imports. We want to increase revenue, to create wealth, and to improve service delivery. These are the strategic areas that we think if we focus a lot of our efforts into these areas, we can be able to feed our service sectors of education, health, and others. Now, many of you might question me after this why I did not mention the transport sector, the health sector, or the education sector, but like I said, if we grow the economy, our returns from that growth will be able to serve our service sectors, which is health, education, good enabling environment, especially infrastructure that can help us grow the economy. Realistically, in terms of baseline indicators in our strategic area 1, promote exports in the mining and petroleum sector. Export base is skewed towards the mining and petroleum sector, which accounts for 80% of our total exports. It is frightening and it is unsustainable. PNG will have to double its economy in other non-mining and petroleum sectors to increase its share of export values to at least 60% of the total export value. So to increase the export volume of this product, several support sectors and enabling environments are critical, and that is needed to facilitate growth. Now, some of the strategies that we need to look at and some of the strategies that I need your constructive views in is the development of the Frida copper mine, is bringing the Wapi Golfu mining on stream, bring the Tolokuma gold mine back into operation, Kainantu gold mine back into operation, the LNG, the Gulf LNG train has to come online. We need to support operation of existing mining projects. We need to attend to landowner issues, to especially addressing our issues to do with our mining and petroleum projects. And we need to increase state participation in direct exploration and mining businesses. In the agriculture and livestock sector, the target is to double commodities export value. It is also to increase the agriculture sector contribution to revenue, GDP, and employment by 3-fold. That is in the agriculture sector. Now we're looking at coffee. Currently, our baseline says that we're contributing about 0.4% to the GDP. We want to increase our export in that area. Our cocoa has a similar statistics as 0.4% of the GDP. That's how much it's contributing to. Copra is just the same, oil palm, rubber, and tea. We need to double that, the statistics that I am mentioning right now. So some of the strategies that we need to look at and we need confirmation on is the revitalization of plantations, especially to replanting programs for coffee, cocoa, coconut, eradication of seed borers, and support extension projects or programs of commodities. Oil palm projects in potential areas around the country, economic corridor investments, and also improving law and order in these areas. In the fisheries sectors, we hold 15% of the world tuna in our waters. So the fisheries sectors is very important. Our targets is to double exports of tuna. It is to increase exports of processed tuna products, and it is to increase fisheries sector contribution to the national revenue and GDP, and also to increase employment 3-fold. Some of the strategies that we intend to put into the medium-term development plan is the Marine Park, the Pacific Marine Park, to undertake 100% onshore processing of our PNG tuna. 3 more onshore tuna processing facilities, especially looking at establishment in Manus, Kikori, and Lae. We're also looking at fiscal incentive to attract more fishing vessels to produce catches onshore. Also effective surveillance of our PNG fishing zones, and we're talking to our partners to look at our border protection. Effective registration of our fishing vessels, and rollout of inland fishing. In our highlands areas, we also need to look at tilapia and barramundi fishing as well. Forestry sector, very important. The Prime Minister talked about banning the round logs by 2020. That is also one of the critical targets that we have, 100% reduction of export of round log by 2020. 100% downstream processing of logs by 2020, and increased contribution of the forestry sector to our national revenue as well. So that is what we're looking at in terms of the forestry sector itself. The manufacturing sectors, I gave you the baseline and the situation as we are. So increasing the participation of SME into the manufacturing sector of food and beverage, textile, clothing, art, craft, and other building and construction products. To increase the manufacturing sector contribution to our national revenue is just as important. Some of the strategies provide financial access and incentive to our national SME, especially in our manufacturing sector. Taxation incentive for our national SME engaging especially in manufacturing, and our national manufacturing products to meet international standards so that it increases exports. Reduction of imports, very important to us. We depend on a lot of imports, but we also need to look at what the country can produce internally. So we contribute to reducing imports. So imports, substitution of food items and dairy products. Some of the strategies in this area, or the targets that we're looking at, is to substitute over 80% of our rice, substitute over 80% of our dairy products. We have started that. Substitute our fruit and vegetables by 40%, and to increase contribution and employment by threefold in this sector as well. So we're looking at rice production, rice project with our private sector partners, especially in our Sepik Plains, our Baya Jimmy Valley, Western Province, Morobe, and the Central Province as well. We support our dairy production through private sector partnership, especially in Central and in Morobe and the Highlands provinces, and we need to look at our economic corridor infrastructure development as some of our mechanisms. Reduce importation of skilled workers. As you can see, most of our construction that happens, we import skilled labor. We need to put a reduction on that, but we need to improve on our own, and we need to build skilled workforce within the country itself. The targets are that all technical skill workforce demand of the country to be filled by nationals, and we need to increase TVET training, testing skills that respond to the market demand. So all our technical school upgrade and training programs need to meet world standards. We need technical college recapitalization programs. We need provinces and districts to have their own TVET institutions, and we need direct foreign aid resources to invest, especially in our technical and polytechnical colleges, because that is where most of our population is, and the workforce needs to be skilled in that area. So in terms of revenue, increased revenue from taxation, we need to register all our individual and SMEs operating in the country. The target is to increase our tax base, to double our revenue collection for all tax and non-tax revenue categories. We need to register all these individuals and SMEs. We need to improve compliance for all areas of revenue collection and its processes. We need IPA business registration and IRC registration as one process to register entities. We need all government contracts to be given to registered taxpayers. We need bank accounts to be open with tax registration numbers. It's a must. We need to remove all exemption and tax holidays. We need citizens to be registered and given tax file numbers as compulsory registration process, and especially under NID project that we have right now. Private individual importers to be registered. Systemize all custom process documentation and all bill of lading. And I will need to wind down really quickly. So those are some of the strategies that we see in increased revenue. In terms of increasing revenue from our SOEs are very important. We need to double profits in our SOEs, we need to double dividends and by our SOEs, and we need to double revenues from SOEs assets. We need to reposition and restructure the SOEs to become more competitive, more efficient, and more profitable while supporting government efforts in service delivery. They serve as the first movers to undertake risky ventures, especially in potential markets and industries. In terms of increased internal revenue generation, especially activities from our provincial government, we need to increase profits significantly. We need to increase dividends from equities and shares. We need to increase revenues from assets and also double our revenue. For this case, we'll give an example of Morobe. They're already going into joint venture arrangement with our partners, especially through the Yalu project that the government intend to take. So provinces are encouraged to enter into investments just as much as national governments can do. Wealth creation, our fourth strategy. We need to reposition and restructure our SOEs to become more competitive. Again, the similar message in my other slide. The targets is also, and furthermore, to increase dividends payments to the state, and we want that double each year. We want to increase employment threefold, and we want to increase SOE contribution to the GDP by especially threefold again. In terms of financial inclusion, access to financial services is critical for wealth creation and growth. Households and SME to have easy access to credit facilities. So those are some of the strategies that we need to look at. So over 50% of SME needs to have access to credits. Developing our small and medium enterprises, the targets is that we need 300,000 profitable SMEs by 2022, with 100% owned by indigenous Papua New Guineans. So we have an SME policy that we need to implement. Effective reserve business activities for Papua New Guineans. We need to double our SME contribution also. So SME development in agriculture, livestock production, textile, cottage industry, retail, construction, businesses, tourism, art, culture, passenger and cargo transportation, professional and skilled services. So those are some of the activities that happen in the SME sector. Our National Reserve Business Policy, we have one, and we need to implement that to achieve 100% national participation in our SME sector. Integrated area development and industrial zones, very important, and it's a mechanism that can also contribute to increased revenue. The Prime Minister talked about small block holders in terms of palm oil and others, and to include individual families. And we need to talk about voluntary customary land acquisition as well. Our targets is to look at 20% of land fully registered for formal markets, also to increase inter-district and provincial growth centers. We need spatial planning for our economic corridor and at least 4 economic potential areas identified and developed as integrated areas of development. Again, in terms of foreign direct investment, the target for foreign direct investment in the mining and petroleum sector needs to increase, and also in the renewable sector as well. So we need to attract a lot of this into the economy, and especially in our infrastructure sector for development. We need to fully develop our public-private partnership policy to tap into the potential of our private sector to invest in the growth sectors of our economy. Tourism is also one sector that contributes a lot to and have the potential to contribute a lot to our revenue. We need to strategically develop a tourism niche product for the country. We need tourism policing to ensure that the safety and our security of our tourists coming in. We need the cost of airfares and accommodation to be affordable, and we need effective marketing abroad to fade the negative publicity internationally about Papua New Guinea. So our target is to grow by 8% annually to 300,000 tourists by 2022, and to end at least 4 billion in the tourism sector by 2022 as well. On the last sector, the improved service delivery sector, the objective is to secure resources and wealth to fund a quality service delivery. Now the message is that to be able to have quality service delivery for our people, we need to grow the economy. That's why we focused a lot more on generating revenue in the medium-term development plan. When we have the revenue, we can be able to sustain, or we can be able to deliver the services that we need to deliver. In terms of improved service delivery, as we said, if we secure up to 20 billion from internal revenue by 2022, we are able to implement quality social service to achieve our SDGs and social indicators. We are able to meet our infrastructure and utility needs. A lot of times people say that maybe we should focus on education first because educated population will contribute a lot. A healthy population will contribute a lot. But we say growing the economy will be able to contribute to ensuring that services are delivered effectively. That is the approach that we are taking in this current medium-term development plan. Now, the important thing that hinges all our planning is our population. We have an increasing population, like I said, 3.1%, and we need to manage and we need to look after this population. As this graph shows, and consistent with implementing our four growth strategies of the MTDP, the growth GDP, or the GDP per capita, increases from 2,112,000 to 5,378,000 by 2022, with higher growth rate, or GDP growth rate, while the population dynamic seems to plateau at the desired carrying capacity. So therefore, establishing the baseline in terms of our status of our development is just as important as looking at how we intend to get there. We get our cue from where we are right now, and we need to put strategies of how we intend to get there. Now listen, we come with a lot of issues and we come with a lot of problems. But I should say, let's stop talking about problems and issues. Let's come with solutions. And I need solutions. The government needs solutions. The medium-term development plan will contain solutions from all of you in this room. You need to help me to strategize and come up with practical, realistic targets, practical, realistic indicators and strategies so that we can together implement this medium-term development plan. So I'm going to ask all of you to not leave us today, tomorrow, and on Thursday, to be with me and my department and my minister, and to work with me collectively as a team to put together what we intend to see going forward. I'd like to acknowledge our international speakers. We also need to look at our external experiences in terms of informing our plan going forward. So the best baseline I've given you. The indicators going forward, I've mentioned to you. For your presentations today, tomorrow, and on Thursday, you need to tell me whether these indicators, this baseline, are the ones that we need to work and improve going forward in the next 5 years. The whole reason why we're having this consultative summit with all of you in this room. I thank you so much for all your attention, and I look forward to all your constructive input into helping my minister, my department, to put together this medium-term five-year plan for the government to implement in its 5-year term in government. Thank you.